You smile when you're hurting, not because you're fake, not because you don't feel it, because somewhere along the way, you learned that your pain was an inconvenience, and you were too perceptive, too considerate, too aware of other people's comfort to let it show. You know this feeling. The moment something cuts deep, and instead of saying it, you go very, very still. You say, "I'm fine." You probably even believe it for a second. Here's what no one has told you about that. The silence isn't protecting you. It's slowly dismantling you. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why, and more importantly, what's actually happening inside the mind of someone who feels everything and says almost nothing. Stay with me, because item 5 is the one that most people have never heard articulated before, and once you hear it, you won't be able to unhear it. You've probably seen videos about emotional withdrawal, about hyperempathy, about what it means to be too aware, and they're not wrong, but they stop at the surface. They tell you what you are. They rarely tell you what it costs you, or why the standard advice, "Just open up, just be vulnerable, just communicate," lands like a joke every single time. These 7 points go deeper. They're not a diagnosis. They're a mirror. And if even 3 of them hit home, this video was made for you. Number 1, the masquerade you don't know you're performing. Have you ever realized, mid-conversation, that you've been performing okay so convincingly that even you forgot you weren't? This is what psychologists call alexithymia-adjacent suppression, not a clinical inability to identify emotions, but a trained one. You spent years learning to read other people's emotional states so accurately that you became an expert at managing your own expression to match what the situation required. Calm when you're devastated, interested when you're exhausted, light when you're in pieces. Here's what other content gets wrong. They frame this as emotional unavailability. It's not. It's emotional fluency weaponized against yourself. You are extraordinarily available to everyone else's feelings. You've just learned to treat your own as low-priority notifications you'll get to later. The shift: start noticing when you're performing, not for others, but for yourself. The most dangerous audience you manage is the one inside your own head. When you catch yourself thinking, "I'm fine," pause and ask, "Fine compared to what?" The reason this matters even more than you think will become clear in a moment. Number 2, the intimacy paradox that no one warns you about. Here's a counterintuitive truth. The people who go quietest when hurt are often the ones who crave closeness most intensely. This is an irony. It's physics. The higher the desire for genuine connection, the greater the perceived cost of rejection. Attachment researchers, building on John Bowlby's foundational work, have shown that people with high relational sensitivity develop what's called a proximity avoidance conflict. They want to move towards someone and simultaneously brace for the impact of doing so. So they don't move. They wait. They send small, deniable signals, a look, a slight withdrawal, a comment designed to be misread. And when those signals aren't caught, they take it as evidence that their deeper feelings wouldn't be caught either. What other videos miss entirely: this isn't fear of vulnerability. It's the fear that your full emotional reality is simply too much, too heavy, too intense, too overwhelming for anyone to actually hold. And so you preemptively hold it yourself, alone, every time. The micro shift: the next time you send a deniable signal, notice it. Name it, privately, for what it was. You're not asking for too much. You're asking from behind a wall. And the reason that wall was built is more specific and more surprising than you've been told. Number 3, the exhaustion that isn't introversion. You might identify as an introvert. You might need time alone to recover from social situations. But there's a specific kind of exhaustion that runs beneath that label. One that has nothing to do with personality type and everything to do with labor. Emotional labor, as sociologist Arlie Hochschild first defined it, is the work of managing your emotional expression to fulfill the relational expectations of a situation. Most people do some of this. But for people who feel everything and say nothing, it's not occasional, it's constant. Every conversation involves a background process. What does this person need from me right now? What am I feeling that might disturb that? How do I present the version of me that makes this interaction safe? That background process runs 24/7. And unlike introversion, which is about stimulation thresholds, this exhaustion is about resource depletion. It's the difference between being tired because you ran a race and being tired because you carried someone else's weight across the finish line while pretending you weren't. The gap that content misses. They tell you to set limits. But limits don't address the internal labor. You can leave the party and still spend the next 2 hours in your own head, running the same management process on your own feelings. The real shift is learning to rest from yourself. We'll come back to what that actually means. Number 4, the case against yourself. This one is quiet. It happens so fast that most people don't catch it happening at all. You have extraordinary perceptive ability. You notice micro-expressions, shifts in tone, the small inconsistencies between what someone says and what their body communicates. You've been doing this since you were young, reading rooms, reading people, staying one step ahead. Now, what happens when that same lens turns inward? Psychologist Albert Bandura's work on self-efficacy shows that our beliefs about our own capability are shaped largely by our interpretive frameworks, the mental narratives we use to evaluate our performance. For highly perceptive people, those frameworks are extraordinarily detailed, and often extraordinarily harsh. You don't just notice when you said the wrong thing. You reconstruct the entire conversation, assign intent to the other person's slight pause, and build a case, with evidence, for why you are fundamentally difficult to love. This is the hidden cost of traumatic intelligence that no one is talking about. The same skill that makes you brilliant at reading others makes you merciless at prosecuting yourself. The microaction, when you catch yourself in self-prosecution mode, ask, would I accept this evidence about someone else? Almost certainly not. The standard you apply to yourself would be thrown out of any reasonable court. But here's where it gets genuinely strange. Because the sharpest pain isn't what you think it is. Number 5, the climax item. The silence isn't about them. Everything you've been told about emotional withdrawal centers on the other person. They weren't safe. They couldn't handle it. They didn't ask the right questions. And sometimes that's true. But here's the thing that will stop you mid-breath if you sit with it. Most of the time, you go silent not because you don't trust the other person. You go silent because, at a level beneath conscious thought, you don't believe your feelings are worth the disruption they would cause. Read that again. This is different from low self-worth in the usual sense. You might have considerable confidence in your professional abilities, your intellect, your value to others. But emotionally, specifically, you operate on a core belief, often formed before you had language to articulate it. My distress is a burden. My needs are inconvenient. The cost of asking is higher than the cost of enduring. Neuroscientist Bessel van der Kolk's research on trauma and the body shows that these beliefs aren't stored as thoughts. They're stored as body states. The tightening in your chest when you want to speak. The way the words dissolve before they reach your mouth. That's not weakness or passivity. That's a survival response that once made complete sense and now runs automatically in situations where you are no longer in danger. The silence wasn't irrational. It was once the most rational thing available to you. An understanding that changes everything about how you approach the possibility of speaking. You are not protecting others from yourself. You are protecting a very old belief about your own worth from being tested. And that belief, it's wrong. But you can't argue yourself out of a body-held truth. You can only, slowly, safely, gather new evidence. Number 6, why just open up is terrible advice. If one more person has told you to just communicate, or just be vulnerable, you already know how that lands. Like being told to just swim when you're afraid of drowning. Here's the psychology of why standard advice fails this specific type of person and why it's not a character flaw that it hasn't worked. Vulnerability, as Breen Brown's research documents extensively, requires a felt sense of psychological safety, not just intellectual knowledge that a person is trustworthy, but a nervous system-level experience of safety. For people who have spent years suppressing and managing, the nervous system has been trained to treat emotional exposure as a threat signal. Even with the right person, in the right moment, the body produces the same physiological cascade as danger, elevated heart rate, shallow breathing, the impulse to deflect or joke or minimize. Just be vulnerable asks you to override that cascade through willpower. It doesn't work because willpower is a cortical function and the cascade is subcortical. You're bringing a rational argument to a physiological emergency. What actually works, and what almost no content addresses, is graduated exposure paired with somatic regulation. Small, low-stakes truths, said out loud, to yourself first, then to one safe person. Not the full emotional inventory, not the most frightening truth first. Just, I'm having a harder time than I've let on. And then, crucially, letting that sentence exist without immediately softening it, explaining it, or taking it back. That's not weakness. That's the bravest thing a person like you can do. Number 7, the cost of never spending it. Emotions are not possessions you can hoard indefinitely without consequence. There's a concept in effective neuroscience called emotional allostatic load, the cumulative physiological and psychological cost of chronically managing unexpressed emotional states. What the research, including work from Janice Kiecolt-Glaser on emotion suppression and immune function, consistently shows is that suppression doesn't neutralize emotion. It metabolizes it into fatigue, into chronic low-grade anxiety, into a generalized numbness that starts as self-protection and ends as disconnection from your own life. You started going quiet to protect your relationships, to keep things smooth, to spare people from the weight of your inner world. But somewhere in the process, you also started going quiet to yourself. And that is the part that costs the most. Not the relationships that didn't hold your feelings, but the relationship with your own experience that you quietly abandoned. The final shift: you don't have to tell everyone everything, but you do have to tell yourself the truth, daily, even if no one else ever hears it. The goal isn't to become expressive. It's to stop being a stranger to your own interior life. Here's the one truth that runs beneath all 7 of these. You did not go quiet because you were weak. You went quiet because you were perceptive enough to understand risk, empathetic enough to prioritize others' comfort, and strong enough to carry what most people couldn't. The silence was a solution, a remarkably competent one. It just outlived the problem it was built to solve. And the work, the real work, isn't learning to speak louder. It's learning to believe, slowly and with evidence, that what you carry deserves to be set down. Not because someone else told you so, but because you are no longer in the room where silence was the safest option. You're somewhere else now. And the question worth sitting with tonight isn't, why am I like this? It's, what would I say if I believed it was worth saying? If something in this video names something you've never quite heard articulated before, drop one word in the comments that describes where you are right now. Just one word. You'll be surprised how much that single act of honesty costs, and how light you feel after. If this is the kind of content that makes you feel a little less alone, subscribe. There's more where this came from, and it only gets deeper.